Listen, my name is Henry Vila. The first block of things is I am a property investor in these type of properties. I've been investing in them for, nearly a decade now in property. Quit my job long time ago to do that. But one of the things that happens when you have that level of freedom is you get bored really quickly, particularly if you have a super active mind like mine. So I decided to go and help other people. So today, my day is divided. A portion of it on managing my own property portfolio, although admittedly that's fairly passive these days and doesn't require a lot of attention. And then the rest is divided between me helping other clients and other property investors run through the same journey, invest in these type of properties to make a big difference to their life, but also, enjoy the everything that this journey has allowed me to do, not only in terms of time with family and holidays and things like that, but also in terms of having the freedom to go and experiment new things in property, to go and try to improve the business and to grow a business. A business for me, it's a big monopoly game, really, where the chase is probably as satisfactory and as driving as the ultimate results. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I certainly haven't been to Yale, and I hope that never happens. But I've had some of the poor kind of cards come out to me that create lots of stress and lots of extra work. But that's just the way the game it is. Again, and sometimes you gotta take the good with the bad. And in my case, it's really fun to actually drive with both things, particularly when we're helping other investors win. Yeah, well, your audience can probably tell from my accent, I wasn't born in Australia, and for many of them, it'll be really hard to pinpoint where my accent is. By now, it's a bit of a mixed up of different things. So I was born in the north of South America, on the edge of the Caribbean, in a beautiful country called Venezuela, that unfortunately is not that beautiful anymore, and there's lots of political instability, and there's a lot of poverty there at the moment and a lot of kind of crisis going up. But it's a very different country to where I left. So I left about 22 years ago, and I came to Australia thinking that I'll be here for a couple of years and then I'll go to where my mom and my family live. By then, they were all living in the United States. And I thought the 9/11 was still creating lots of economic havoc in the United States. And I thought, well, you know what? I'll go to this weird country I've never been to called Australia, get some experience on that part of the world for a couple of years, and then I'll move back to the United States and resume my life. Little did I know that I was going to fall in love with this country and its people, and what was going to be a 2-year stint became a forever thing. My kids were born here. I've been here for 22 years. And as a consequence of that, obviously the accent is a little bit of a mix of Latin American, a little bit of American. And while most Australians don't pick it up, my American family definitely pick a little bit of an Australian accent on me. So it's all a mixed up. I came here spent 25 years in the corporate world, both back home and here in Australia. Worked for some big companies and for some great brands that everyone will know about. Worked for IBM, worked for Toyota, worked for some of the kind of big accounting and consulting firms around. And then I realized that I was chasing something that was never really going to fulfill me. One day I woke up and I just hated my job, hated it with passion. And then had to look for something different. And property was that vehicle. Through hearing lots of podcasts like this one and lots of other mentors kind of around, I realized that property had the power to make the change that I wanted in my life. So I did it rather quickly. It took me probably about 2 years to go from not knowing anything about property to being able to quit my job. But through all of that process, we tried a whole bunch of different things. So started doing renovations and buying just properties under market value to then go and refinance, to then doing townhouse development. I founded a building company that specializes in building townhouses and that sort of stuff. But eventually found my thing, which is what I do today. It's most of the investments I have today are in that space, which is high cash flow rooming houses. And it's a very, very specific type of property that has the power to not only create brilliant returns, but also change the life of so many people.
Absolutely. Wow, that's an amazing story. Have you been there yourself?
Listen, I miss the old Venezuela, but for sure, it's a beautiful country with beautiful things and some great people. But unfortunately, has some really, really silly governments over the last probably 60, 70 years. And I joke a little bit, through that process of political change and political unrest, they decided to change the legal name of the country. And the day that happened, I kind of started joking about this. I said, like, I was born in a country that doesn't exist anymore. The physical place does, but the actual country doesn't. Now, do I hope that one day we get back to the golden age of Venezuela, where we had, big sort of kind of coffee farms and some kind of great people? Yeah, absolutely do. We have some brilliant places there, which I hope I get to see one day again. But at the moment, much like those people who rightly advised you to stay away, personal safety is a big issue over there at the moment. So unfortunately, I'm kind of stuck with other parts of the world for now.
For good reason as well, too. You work there?
Yeah, so grew up in Venezuela. Follow pretty much the traditional path that most people in that country will have. Got lucky enough to get good education in primary school and high school. Back then, if you're gonna go to university, if you're gonna be anything in life, you need to go to private school. That's just the way it is. But I got lucky enough that I had some parents that worked incredibly hard to make that possible, particularly my mom. And then once I've gone through that, then I went to university. I went to was probably one of the top universities in Latin America to do some engineering studies, sort of undergraduate studies in engineering, particularly around things like technology and IT and project management and things like that. And then this is back in the 90s, where at the dawn of the internet, pretty much. And I was lucky enough to be working in some of the research labs in university where we did some of the first internet projects in the country. So when the private internet came along, I was the lucky handful of people to be tapped in the shoulder to go and make it happen, to install the networks, to install the service providers, and to go and take, at an incredibly young age, I think I was 21, I found myself being, in a pretty significant operational role for, I guess, the local equivalent to what will be Telstra over here, managing the biggest internet provider in the country. That drove me a lot, that drive for learning and that thirst for a kind of new knowledge and the excitement of working with completely new things that no one had done at the time really drove me in that career. Little did I know that it was going to get me deeper and deeper into it. But I guess at the same time, it's the same knowledge and drive that eventually allowed me to qualify for what at the time was the permanent residency program back in the age of John Howard, and brought me to this country. So I shouldn't complain too much.
Just for a couple of years, your intention?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. So again, program was pretty open. I had a friend who had lived in Brisbane for 5 years, and we'll have conversations every weekend about how the country was going down a pretty bad path, and we should think about leaving. There's also a peculiarity in Venezuela, which is Venezuela is involved, or the whole of Latin America is involved in a whole bunch of regional businesses. But the communication and travel between countries in the region is really, really hard. So there's not a lot of direct flights between capitals and things like that. So what ends up happening is most of the regional businesses end up establishing themselves in the United States, particularly in Florida. Now, by then, my mom lived in Florida, so I'm like, sure, we should definitely move the business to Florida. and then travel to the Peru and Ecuador and Brazil and Chile and Argentina and Venezuela to then have the meetings and have the conversations and the operational work that we needed to do in each of those countries. So in a way, I was already fairly mobile as an executive, but it was very, very obvious that the region as a whole could do better, and Venezuela particularly was going down a pretty tough path. So we decided we were going to go somewhere. Now, by then, 9/11 had happened, and the economy of the United States was in the doldrums, so that put a handbrake not only in the United States, but in the whole of Latin America as well. And we just needed somewhere to go and seek refuge where we could do something interesting and learn some more for a couple of years. And again, I had this friend who lived in Brisbane and said, you should really look at Australia. And I wondered, what are you talking about? Australia is like 17,000 kilometers away. I know nothing about Australia other than a poorly dubbed version of Crocodile Dundee and maybe whatever we get to see in the news. But once I started kind of research more in detail, I realized that our country has a brilliant economy with a pretty stable economical and political system and a thriving business scene that really make it a really attractive thing around the world. So I decided to come and learn from these crazy Aussies about how we do things here, in the hope that knowledge was then going to make me more better rounded and give me an edge when I'm back to the United States. But obviously, once I came here, I realized that this was a forever thing rather than a 2-year thing.
That's what I find a lot of people.
Yeah, listen, I think we have a very good balance between the ability to forge ahead, the ability to get ahead in life, and whether it's business or property or anything else or professional career. And being able to kind of go ahead and if you want to be rich in this country, the doors are open and anyone can go for their life in that regard. But at the same time, we actually have a culture and a country that, we don't take life too seriously, and we have some really incredible safety nets in this country. That means that you can actually pick that right balance between building wealth and making money, but also enjoying that money. Unfortunately, many countries in the world, the United States included, and most of Latin America, you can't have that balance. You're either driving every day to kind of make more money and to progress in your career, or you get put aside very, very quickly. So it creates a very toxic environment in many ways and in many instances, which luckily are very rare in Australia. Here we have while we have things like tall poppy syndrome and other things which are not necessarily super productive, the reality here is that no one's gonna have a go at you or complain because you wanna, spend dinners with your family. No one's gonna complain because you wanna take your kids to a soccer game on a Saturday or anything like that. Whereas in other countries, you have this sort of distortion where people expect that when you're at work or in business, that personal life doesn't really exist and that it's a completely separate thing. And the reality is that that's not the way humans work. More importantly, in the case of property and people who are listening to this podcast and who have gone into their own property journeys, I'll say it in my book, which I'm pretty sure we'll talk in a second, but the most important thing is for you to understand and to know what you want, so then you can go and chase it, rather than this empty chase that exists in other parts of the world, or chasing money for money's sake and to be able to, buy things that you don't really want to impress people that don't really care about. It's something that unfortunately has become the norm in many places in the world, whereas here in Australia, I think we still have a very balanced view of what we want and a very balanced view of the future, particularly for the people who do the homework of thinking about it.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, listen, definitely some tough times there at the beginning, although to be honest, they're nothing compared to what other people have gone through. Like, I wasn't escaping prosecution. I came from a kind of middle income family where, resources weren't super complicated. But of course, when we move to another country, you lose all of that. I get here, I know no one, I have no connections. I don't even know the names of the companies or the streets. I saw a short video the other day of my first day in Melbourne, and I'm mispronouncing every street. I have this super weird Latin American twang into my English, that I'm like, wow, this is how far we've come. But I was lucky enough that I came to this country at a time where there was a massive skill shortage in the specific area in which I was an expert. So that allowed me to find a job relatively quickly. It wasn't a super high paying job, but it was a decent job that I could live with. And again, being a country where decent life is fine, or where you can, doing almost anything, you can have a somewhat decent life. I kind of embraced it with both hands. And then probably over the next 10 years, I was able to drive and climb the corporate ladder into that career the same way that I've done, in Venezuela, kind of the decade before. I was able to kind of go into managerial roles and into higher responsibility roles very, very quickly. I managed to turn around my area of expertise to make it more appealing to Australia, more broadly kind of applicable, particularly to management roles. I went and did an MBA at Melbourne Business School that taught me a lot about kind of management and business in general. Many of the concepts that I apply today to my own business kind of come from that learning. And then, progressively went into bigger and bigger roles, into more and more senior positions, and into broader roles, which saw me move from, I guess, technical specialties in the technology world and the risk world to more broader sort of program and project management roles, and ultimately to become a strategy consultant with some of the kind of bigger strategy firms in this country, and allow me to go and see a bunch of different businesses in a really, really short period of time. I think in the 5 or 10 years that I was a consultant, probably saw maybe 300 different businesses from the inside, from the perspective of turning them around and identifying where the constraints were, and then obviously growing them, whether it's for mergers or sale or a number of other things kind of along the way. So it was a really varied career. Yeah.
It's amazing to hear that. What were some of the common patterns that you found, especially in that?
That's a brilliant question, actually, and I don't think that has ever been asked. So I'm going to have to think a little bit about this. But generally speaking, the patterns always came from the perspective of, let's continue doing the stuff we've always done, or, we have a tradition or a history, so we need to go and embrace that and make sure that we don't let it go, because that makes us who we are. Instead of, not only driving, but sometimes even just observing the changes that are about to happen, and then be part of those changes. Make sure that the organizations and the people within those organizations ultimately changes ahead of what's needed. I guess, if you're the kind of guy who grew up in, the 1800s doing horseshoes and, blacksmithing that way, and then you didn't predict that there were going to be cars and that mechanics was going to be the thing, even though it's a pretty comparable skill, then I'm pretty sure a lot of those guys kind of suffer. Now, the same thing happens today with individuals, right? Companies are made by individuals at the end of the day. So particularly these days where, property is changing, where the way people use properties are changing, the way deals are made, and then things like AI and other kind of disruptive technologies are changing our world. If we're able to see those changes happening and interpret how those changes are going to change the way we work and live, then we're able to not only take advantage of those, but sometimes become the driving force that it's ultimately going to be in a much better place when those technologies become a much more important part of our life than they are today.
Rely on 100%, but it saves a lot of legwork.
Yeah.
How's that impacted your business and your view?
Yeah, listen, I'm lucky enough that I've seen this type of massive disruptive pattern twice in my life, and some people don't even see one. Some people see, some people see one. But I saw the dawn of the internet, and I was, like I was telling the story before, I was lucky enough to be there where the whole thing started. And I was lucky enough to be there in the 90s, where anything that had internet next to it created this big hype and raised these massive amounts of people's money. And then, things kind of went really, really pear-shaped, obviously, after Y2K and in 2001 when the bubble burst. But I also then saw the rebuild of the good stuff, the actual technology behind it, the ability to transact with anybody, the ability to do, e-commerce and things like that through the whole cycle, all the way from kind of back then to some of the stuff that we had to do during COVID, where you had click and collect, and you have a whole bunch of different things where the internet now is just part of our life. AI is the next internet. AI is not going to be, the atomic bomb that is going to kill everything. It's just going to be an impressive tool. Now, those who embrace it and decide to use that tool as part of still creating value and still driving business, using some of the same basic principles that have always existed, those guys are going to be the winners. Now, the people who close their eyes and that pretend it doesn't exist or see it as a scary monster that is coming to eat your second child, those are the guys who are really gonna, by the time they realize that this stuff is a thing, they're gonna be too late. It reminds me of some of the dinosaurs in the 90s and early 2000s who said, no, e-commerce is doomed to fail because no one is gonna put their credit card on a website because they don't know where they're coming. And we used to use an example around, how much more protected credit cards are in a website than they are when you give them to the waiter in a restaurant that you've never been to, and the guy disappears with your credit card for 20 minutes. So AI is going to be exactly the same thing. It's not really going to change business or the principles of business. It's just going to change the way we execute on those principles. And like everything, someone with a tool in their pocket is going to be much more powerful than someone who doesn't have those tools. We're a pretty good example. We spent all of last week with a group of property investors and business leaders just having a deep study and a deep work on how can we better use AI to create better outcomes for us and us as investors and for our clients. And we probably have 4 or 5 different areas that between now and the end of the year, we're going to completely transform by using AI tools. And that allows us to then deploy the resources that we're freeing from doing those activities into stuff that only humans can do. Things around human connection, things around conversations like the one you and I are having today, but also things around creativity and other things that computers are historically not really good at. But when you put both things together, you end up with a really, really powerful formula. Yeah, I'll give you 2 examples, actually. So the first example is probably where everyone here in this podcast will imagine, and again, almost any business leader is talking about this. We're using AI to help us accelerate the way we put information out there, the way we do marketing, the way we accelerate sales. Every meeting we have today, whereas before we will have like an intern taking notes and hope that they're fast enough and things like that. Today, every meeting I have has an AI note taker that captures absolutely every word I say, even with my weird accent. And then it takes a step beyond. It actually goes and analyzes everything that was said and then helps me go through the thinking of things like actions. It reminds me of anything that got discussed. And sometimes, to be honest, it picks up the nuances that I might not have picked up because I was too entertained in the conversation. So that's one area. But that area, it's been there for a while. A lot of people can use it. There's a lot of products that anyone can access to do that. The second area we're actually trying to do is an area where we have the experience and have the skills and the people to be able to execute on, but it's incredibly labor intensive. And it's things like trying to identify what the best areas to do these investments are in, right? So we develop a concept called tenant mathematics, which is a 3 key factors that allows us to tell whether an area is the right area in the short and in the long term to put investments like a rooming house. But today, do that analysis, it probably takes about 40 hours of a human to go and analyze all the information, to go and analyze all the data, to see things like the titles and the restrictions and the covenants and the easements and the utility information to try to determine whether the demand's there and whether there's any competition in the area before making an assessment. The process to do that, it's very, very parameterized. It's very, very, very structured. So we're now in the process of teaching our own AI tools and our own AI kind of systems to be able to go through those steps. Now, it's not 100% yet where we're going to be able to give it an address and say yes or no in 30 seconds like most other IT stuff works. But at the moment, it's reducing that work from 40 hours to about 20. And by the end of the year, I'm pretty sure within a day, we'll be able to tell whether a site is a site that we should move on or not, that one of our investors should make a decision on or not. And with that power, we're going to be able to make the right decision much quicker than most other people out there in the market, which means that we'll be able to take the best sites much quicker. And more importantly, make sure that we don't take a site that has a hidden problem or a problem that we haven't been able to see, and that then means the investor then buys a lemon or buys a site that is ultimately not going to provide the results that they're looking for.
The next stage with AI implementation, that's amazing. I can't wait to hear how that goes as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen. Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, absolutely. I think speed to market it's important, right? That person that has the better information quicker. The reality is, particularly in property, money loves speed, right? If you're one of those persons that thinks about it forever and tries to think about the 20,000 things that can go wrong with an investment or with a property, well, chances are you're going to take a lot longer to make your first investment, which means that this chain that I have gone through, this kind of growth that people like me kind of go through, and that has allowed portfolios to grow and multiply and ultimately make us financially free. If you're too slow, you just will never get there because it's just going to take you too long to do. I know people who, I made my first investment probably took me a month. If your first investment takes you 2 or 3 years, then, and the same thing happens every time you're going to do one of those decisions, then, after 10 years, you might have 3. After 20 years, maybe you have 6. I can tell you after 20 years, I'm going to have a lot more property than those. And they're all going to be better properties just because I move faster. Yeah, great question. And I'm going to tell a little bit the stories. I think I've told this story only a couple of times. I came to Australia, no kids. It was just me and my wife. And then as you do later, I had kids. Now, we took our sweet while to have kids. So by the time that this happens, my kids were probably 4 or 5, something like that. And that year, I spent 220 nights away from home. So I was traveling a lot for work and, really tired, really frustrated. So I'll come home, crash for 2 days, and then off to the airport again. And one of those times, as I'm leaving, one of my kids kind of comes out to kind of give me a hug. And then he said the words that changed my life forever. He said, "Daddy, goodbye. Thanks for visiting." And I'm like, wow. I'm actually not going to say what I actually said. Is when I keep this so most people can hear it. But and it made me realize that my kids who were just 5 were seeing life so much more clearly than I was. They saw that all I was doing was grinding. And I wasn't even living in my home. I was just a visitor over the weekends who would come in for a day or two and then disappear again. That day, I decided that it was all over. That day, I decided that this dream that I was chasing of, progressing onto those big firms and eventually becoming a partner was only a symbol of slavery. and that all I was chasing was stuff I really didn't want it. I was just doing it because I could and because I was really good at it. So that day I decided that a change was needed. Now, it took me probably a year to figure out what the change was. And eventually I found property and I realized that I had the right skills, that I understood it, that it was exciting to me. But it was also an instrument where I could leverage my knowledge, and the fact that I wasn't part of a big firm or of a big corporation didn't actually slow me down. It allowed me to know that in property in this country, we're lucky enough that normal moms and dads and individuals can make as much of progress and can make as much of a difference as the big corporations can, sometimes even bigger than the bigger corporations can, because we can move faster. So I decided that property was it. And then, like most people in property, then it's like, okay, it's property, but what within property? There's probably 20 different strategies in property. And I had to deal with the fact that I didn't have a lot of money behind me. In fact, I had no money behind me. And then we wanted to move really, really quickly to a point where I could basically quit my job. And whatever I did was going to be on top of a very, very busy life. So I started, looking at renovations and doing some buy and hold deals, but they were just too slow and renovations were just too risky. You couldn't really predict the outcome from the beginning, because once you pull the plaster down, you realize that you had a whole bunch of rotten pipes and wires you needed to change and things that you didn't plan for and that no one was going to pay for and that you had to make happen anyway. So then I went to the next best thing, which is buying all houses, knocking them down, and then putting 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 townhouses in those projects that were a little bit more predictable and that ultimately created more value. And then because they created more value, I could capture a significant portion of that. And that was good for a while until the market turned, and then construction costs started to increase, and the banks decided that they were going to be tighter lending money, and then the mom and dad developers out there got squished in between the sell price of the property at the end and the price in which they actually acquired these properties, and then the construction costs that were required to actually do the whole thing. So projects started to become less and less profitable. And looking at those patterns that I was talking about before, it was very, very obvious to me that stuff wasn't going to work forever. That maybe we had another year or so until they didn't work at all. We didn't know anything that COVID was coming back then either. So COVID, I think, accelerated that process even more. So then I started looking at ways of creating more value permanently. And to not do townhouses where you do a great project and maybe make a couple $100,000, but that's the end of the road. And then if you want to make another couple $100,000, then you need to go and do another project. So effectively what you're doing is you're changing one job for another job. I decided to then... That's right. That's the other thing. It's a long, long time between drinks, right? So I have projects that, have taken 3 or 4 years from, spending all this money to actually kind of getting the result. And there's people been gone even longer, so I shouldn't even complain. I'm not probably the worst one out there. So I decided to then hedge my bets and then go and invest some of the profits out of these projects into cash flow property. And that in itself was a completely different journey. Because in this country, cash flow out of property is a really, really hard thing to do. There's not that many ways of actually doing it. There's actually probably 2 or 3, and not many of them are kind of well known and well understood. So I kind of went overseas, made some investments in the United States, went to New Zealand to try to make some investments over there, and then on to regional Victoria and other places. But ultimately, I eventually found the answer. And the answer is the same answer that has always allowed businesses to progress, is to create lots of value for lots of different people. I realized that chasing the number of properties we had in the portfolio, which is the typical approach, let's try to have as many properties as we can as a way of gaining scale, was completely wrong. The right way was to look at the number of tenants we were creating value for. And by having more tenants, we were able to provide a much better result. So then we went and had a look and said, well, how can we have more tenants? And that's when we discovered high cash flow rooming houses. And once we saw it, it was really, really clear that it was a business that not only had a big gap over there, that had a massive demand all through the country, but particularly around Victoria where we operate, but also allows us to make lots of money at the same time that we were making a real difference to the people living in those properties and to the community at large.
Positive, high cash flow type of opportunity for people.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to do that, actually. So rooming houses, unfortunately, are one of those strategies that has a massive stigma attached to it. And I think it's a somewhat historical and somewhat related to what some investors are doing even today. The reality is rooming houses have existed in our country for about 100 years. They got created early in the 20th century as a way of allowing people coming back from the war to have a place to live and to have a place to be able to kind of stay while they effectively rebuild their lives after being at war for years. And then that concept sort of evolved over the years until probably about 50, 60 kind of years ago, they turned into these houses where, all sorts of unsavory characters will go and hang out. People who, didn't have a family or didn't have, a lot of money and sometimes had lots of problems with drugs and alcohol and all sorts of behavioral issues. They will go and hang out. And the problem is, I think that's the memory that most Australians, that's a reaction that most Australians have when people like me say rooming houses. That's kind of what they think about, right? They think about these ugly houses run down, full of unsavory characters. But the reality is that that's not what the modern rooming house is. From about 10 years ago when we started doing this stuff, and probably another 5 or 6 years before then, we've been looking at how can we use that regulation, how can we use that model of creating one property that allows multiple residents to kind of live independently but in the same building and to be able to share the cost but not necessarily the benefit, could live together. So the rooming houses we build today are very, very different of the rooming houses of only a couple of decades ago. They almost resemble, we actually call them studios instead of rooms, because each of these studios has its own bathroom, has its own kitchenette, and basically has everything they need to be able to live independently. Everything they need to be able to carry a life that is super high quality, but on a small space. And where we've been able to deploy a lot of the learning that we have taken from other places. As I was saying before, my family live in the United States. My in-laws live in New York City. New York City, the smallest apartment we visited in New York City ever, it's 9 square meters. That's a 3x3, including the bathroom and the kitchen. It's a tiny little place. But that's just the way you live if you're in New York City. A big apartment is like 30 or 40 square meters. If you're in a 50 square meter place, you're in a mansion over there. So what we've done is we say, well, how do these people actually make it work? Because we, in Australia, we're not particularly good at making small places work. So we had to go there and meet lots of people over there and see lots of property and lots of projects over there, and then import some of those ideas and deploy them here in a way that people can have a super high quality accommodation that is really, really affordable compared to the big, 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom house. But at the same time, it's just only small in space, not in quality. It's still super high quality. And unfortunately, those ideas are not natural from here. We've designed and evolved some here, but most of them are imported from other places like New York City and Tokyo. We actually have a trip to Tokyo in about a month where we're going to meet a whole bunch of people and see a whole bunch of projects to take those ideas from those places and incorporate them into into the properties we so much desperately need in this country. So.
Tenants in there, except just that it's a little bit bigger space.
Absolutely, and listen, the way we see it is as a way of leveraging we call it impact, right? So the way of leveraging the positive impact that we create into the community, right? Historically, when you buy one property, you help one family, but you also have one income. When you buy a rooming house, the types that we build, and we build rooming houses of different sizes, but generally speaking, you buy one property and you're helping 9 different people or sometimes couples, right? And at the same time, in return, you get 9 different incomes. So even though the incomes are a little bit lower, because obviously it's affordable accommodation and the spaces are smaller, by the time you add them together, you're in a much better place than you will be if you were just buy one house, put one family, get one rent, and hope they never leave and hope they never stop paying rent. That all of those things get mitigated by investing in the type of properties we build.
Totally agree. So I want to just take a...
Yeah, listen, it was really a coincidence actually in many ways. So originally we were looking at, okay, how can we create smaller units, and maybe we thought apartments was going to be the way to go. Obviously, New South Wales and Sydney have gone through a period where apartments became more popular and became more interesting. And then we started having a look at kind of some of this stuff. And then we actually bumped into this concept while being overseas. And then when we came back and started talking to people about it, then one of our kind of property advisors very quickly kind of told me like, no, you can actually do that in Australia. It's called a rooming house. And then that sat us down a path of actually researching what was required, not only in terms of the regulation and in terms of what's really required from a building code perspective and all of those elements, but also in terms of what will work for the market. How do we make sure that we don't have problematic tenants? How do we make sure that we have good people, young professionals, single retirees, divorcee women over 50, people who are really going to take care of the property, who are really going to be able to kind of improve their lives and at the same time improve the life of the investors or really us as investors, but eventually of some of our clients as well. And again, it's not something that happened overnight, and it has become a little bit one of the values of Stone Horizon, I guess, is we're trying to improve all the time. From the first rooming house we built a long, long time ago to dozens and dozens of properties that we built, these over the years. We now been able to, every project, there's some learning. Every project, there's another idea. Every project, there's a little bit of a test that we learn from. And if it works, we make it part of our standard and we include it in every future project. And then if it doesn't work, then well, I guess that's the cost of experimenting sometimes. But in general speaking, most of these properties are providing an excellent result, not only to the people who own them, but also to the hundreds and hundreds of happy people living in them.
That's great. Well, by that time, we were already financially free.
Yeah, listen, I had quit my job back then, and it was just a matter of actually making sure that I could make my money multiply over the years. It's no use to being financially free for a year and then having to go back to work. And I didn't want to go back to work ever again. So for us, it was a way of actually improving the returns of our own portfolio, to transition from doing the townhouses and the big projects into something that had a more long-term view, that had a more longer return kind of way of doing things. Now, we didn't do that overnight, and we certainly started with our own portfolio. But by the time I built probably 3 or 4 of these properties, it was very, very obvious that there was a massive need in the market, not only from tenants, but also from investors who were desperate for to invest in properties that were positive cash flow. And as you do when you're an investor, you talk to other investors, and other investors started kind of pushing, "Hey, Henry, can you build one of these properties for me?" He said, "No, really, it's like I'm still learning, I'm still experimenting, I don't have the complete concept yet." And then eventually they pushed so hard that I decided to give it a go. And then that set us down a path where I realized that we couldn't really do townhouses and rooming houses in the same business. We couldn't really do them with the same team. So a decision needed to be made. There's plenty of people building townhouses out there. There's plenty of great builders who can do great projects out there. But there was no builder who was specializing in building these rooming houses, these properties that are so desperately needed out there. So we decided to make it our mission. We decided to completely pivot the business into building rooming houses, both for us and for other clients. And I guess that's all we do today. We haven't looked back since. Yeah, more than happy to run through that. So listen, the project overall takes about a year, sometimes a little bit quicker, but generally speaking, we tend to say to people, think about it as a 1 year project. The first month or so, it's all about finding the right location and finding the right block of land. These properties can happen anywhere in Victoria. We operate all across the state. But we want to make sure that we put these properties in a place that not only have demand now, but also have demand in the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. So we take a very, very long-term approach to these things. We don't believe in hotspots for rooming houses. That's just something that is fraught with so much danger that we very, very early decided that wasn't going to be the right approach to get the right results. So within about a month, sometimes a little bit quicker, we find the right site. And then we do both a financial feasibility, which is obviously super important in any property, in any property project, but particularly around rooming houses, but also what we call a technical feasibility. Rooming houses work a little bit different to townhouses in the sense that in a townhouse or in a house, if you're in the right suburb, you're probably in the right place. And yes, some suburbs have little pockets here and there, but generally speaking, this street or the next street, there's not a huge difference. Unfortunately, that's not the way it works with rooming houses. In rooming houses, you might have a block that is perfect here, and only 500 or 100 meters away, you might have another block that is completely unsuitable to build this type of product. So we do a technical feasibility to make sure that the target blocks of land that we're looking at have the right conditions, have the right tenant mathematics, that have the right financial viability, and that have the right technical viability, things like slope, things like shape, because ultimately we love the ugly ducklings. We do plenty of these projects in slopey sites and irregular sites, and that site that's been around for 10 or 20 years and no one has built on because it's just too hard. Those are the sites that tend to provide some of the best exciting projects for us and some of the best results for our investors. That takes about a month. Now, once we have the site, then we follow a philosophy, which is we design every rooming house for the block of land it's sitting in. We don't have a drawer with like 20 different floor plans and try to jam one of those floor plans into a site just because it's easier or because it's cheaper. We have a team of designers here in the business that specialize in building and designing these properties with us. So we go and design every property. That process takes 10 to 12 weeks. It's probably one of the things that slows down a little bit, but it's actually super important step to make sure that what we're ultimately going to build is not only compliant with the regulation, but it's also going to ultimately attract the best tenant possible. And then from that point, then we start building. We are a building company, as you know, and as much of the audience will know by now, that, as a building company, we don't go and deal with other people. We have our own team, we have our own supervisors and our own carpenters, and we use the same team of subcontractors in certain areas all the time. These people have been trained and specialized in building these type of properties. They've done it over and over and over again for many, many years. That way, we ensure that not only we're building a property that is compliant, but it's going to be built quickly, that it's ultimately going to get to that practical completion within that period. And then once we get to the end, 6 months, 9 months, then it's just a matter of doing some of the licensing, registration, and compliance steps, which we do for most investors. rather quick, simple process because we have it so standardized. And then it's a matter of having the tenants move in. So generally speaking, from the beginning of conception of the project all the way to the first tenant moving in, it's probably about a year.
Rooming houses in every different state have different regulations and rules and so forth. It's not as simple through a DA process. Like, how does that whole
Yeah, you're completely right. And I'm going to try to use both here, New South Wales language and Victorian language, so your broader audience can understand kind of what I'm saying. But yeah, the processes in every state are different. We're lucky enough that in Victoria, the processes are standardized across the state. So we don't have a council by council thing, which other states do have. We're even luckier than that. So we have a planning exemption from the state government. That means that these projects don't need to go through a DA. That anywhere you can build, or most places you can build a regular residential house, you can build one of these things. And we go straight to a building permit through a private building surveyor, which is a Victorian name, or a private certifier, the way you will in New South Wales. And then we literally go straight into construction. Which means that the waiting period for these projects to actually happen, it's a lot short than it is. We have gone from design to turning dirt on site, sometimes as little as a week. Whereas if you were doing a townhouse project, that time will probably turn into a 6 or a 10-month wait.
get started in something like this?
Yeah, it's a great question. And listen, the reality is this stuff is not for everybody. We work with a relatively small number of investors every year, probably about 20 at the time that we're recording this is what our target for this year is. And I don't imagine that number will move massively because we want to make sure that everyone we work with turns into a success story. That's probably our first priority. I don't need this to actually leave. I could be doing all sorts of things. We do it because we really want to make a difference. So because of that, it's really, really important that the people that work with us meet certain criteria. We'll start with the money because that's probably what people listening to the podcast, I really want to know. So most investors who invest in this type of property tend to put in between $200,000 and $400,000 in cash or equity, and that's just the fact of the equity contribution that these properties require, which is a little bit higher than your typical residential house where maybe you can get 80 or 90% LVR. In these type of properties, generally speaking, 80 is the absolute minimum, the absolute limit, I guess. But more likely, most people tend to put about 70%, tends to use about 70% LVR lending, which means that they tend to put in about 30%. So you need to have those resources. If you don't have those resources, there's other ways we can probably help your audience. Obviously, we can, we have the book and other things. But in terms of working with us directly or investing in this type of property, that's probably the first requirement. The second thing that is super important for us is you need to be able to be in the type of projects where you trust the experts. Because we're here ultimately to do that. We're here ultimately to bring that experience and that expertise to help our clients. And if our clients don't want to be helped, if they want to have control of every single decision and every single item through the process, and they want to go and coordinate the tenants or the tradies or go and inspect every single kind of possible option, that's actually going to be problematic. It's doable, but it lengthens the process so much more that what we call the time to cash flow extends itself. We have designed this process to be super efficient, to get us to cash flow quickly, because that's the point at which the investor or the owner stops forking out money into this property and effectively the tap turns the other way and starts receiving money every month. So that's it, right? It got to be someone who ultimately wants help in an end-to-end basis. That's why we design the properties. That's why we build the properties. That's why we manage and operate the properties. That's what allows a lot of our property owners and a lot of our investors to be able to be so far removed from their investment, sitting go do something else, whether it's a career or a job, drink mojitos in the Bahamas, and then, just sit down, receive a statement and a check. Well, there's no real checks, a bank transfer, I guess, every couple of weeks. So you need to want that. If you don't want that, then this is not the type of investment for you. And the third thing, which is, I guess, is less important because you get it whether you want it or not. But we like working with people who are happy making money at the same time that they're making a difference to the world. That's why I made this my mission. It's like, don't get me wrong, I'm making lots of money from my portfolio and I'm happy about that. And I hope I make even more money into the future. But I'm very, very comfortable and I'm very, very satisfied. I'm very happy to know that while I'm doing that, I have hundreds of tenants who today are going to have a roof over their heads because they are living in a studio in one of my properties. I think that is something that is really heartwarming, that really allows us to think the right way, and that having, so many investors both in our portfolio and we haven't met yet, ultimately get excited about.
Yeah, what do you think you would say to him?
Listen, 10 years ago, I had just made the decision to kind of quit my job. And I was incredibly scared. I was at that point where I wasn't really sure where I was going. I wasn't really sure where I was driving or whether I was going to succeed or not. I was full of fear and doubt. And I wish I could talk to that guy today to tell him two things. The first one is that it's all going to be okay, right? The first one is I wish I could tell him where we were going to be and the size of the impact and how much we were going to be able to kind of change the world in so many ways. But the second thing, which might be a surprise to some of your listeners, is that sense of fear, that sense of uneasiness, that sense of doubt was never going to go away. All that was going to happen is that we were going to learn how to manage it better. We were going to learn how to use it to drive us instead of scare us and paralyze me. I think if I look at it today, I'm probably not too different to that guy back then who really want to make to change, who really want to make a difference, but wasn't really sure what the future was going to entail. And again, that's one of the things that drives me forward. I tend to say to my team, in our mission, we're like a shark. We look aggressive and driven and sure we're making, lots of impact. But we're also like a shark in the sense that if we're not moving forward, if we're not swimming, then we're drowning. And I think that's critical. And it's critical to so many investors. So many investors have followed this traditional sense. I talk about it in the Rooming House Millionaire. They have this view of financial freedom that is some sort of finish line that, when you cross it, you kind of put your arms up like it's, Tour de France or something, and you arrived and it's there and you finish and you don't need to do anything ever again. And that's not the reality of financial freedom. The reality of financial freedom is that it changes with you, and that the definition of financial freedom is so personal that no one will be able to tell you what's the formula. No one will be able to tell you, how to calculate it. No one's going to be able to tell you, what the number is, because it's ultimately what's going to make you feel free. For some people, sure. For some people, it's quitting their job like it was for me. For other people, it's completely replacing their income and never having to work again. But for other people, it's just making an extra $10,000 a year and being able to maybe go to 4 days a week, and maybe they be able to go to the soccer game of their kids or to the violin recital of one of their children. And then to some people, it's doing really, really big things, being really ambitious, having the private jets and the Lambos, which it's not really in the same universe as someone's salary. It's so much more than that. And the biggest secret is it can also change. So when I started this journey, financial freedom for me was about quitting my job and not having to work for assholes. Yeah. And whereas today is very different. Today is about making an impact. And yeah, sure, I want nicer cars and I want the odd toy here and there. Now, I don't want a Lambo and a private jet, at least not now. That's not what I'm after. But I love to travel and I love to enjoy good food and I love to enjoy good company with friends. And sure, I would love to kind of make a difference and help other investors too. But I wouldn't have defined financial freedom like that a decade ago. And I guess that's not only what I wish I could say to Henry 10 years ago. That's what I hope I can say to your listeners today, because many of them today are in a radically different place to where they're going to be 10 years from now. If only they take those first steps, if only they trust that the universe is there to give opportunities to all of us, and if we go and chase them, we can change our life forever.
As opposed to how much of it because of luck.
Ooh, you get me in shaky territory now, Tyron. And listen, I have a very, very strong view on this one, and I think it's a view that a lot of people share with me. A lot of people are sort of afraid to talk about it too much, but more and more we're hearing people, particularly really successful people, kind of share the view, which is I wouldn't be without where I am, no matter the work or the skills or anything else, if I didn't have some luck, right? At the end of the day, a lot of my success is about being at the right place in the right time. We're talking about that just before, right? I came to this country for a completely different purpose to what my life looks like today. And I just bump into the right people, and I bump into the right mentor, and I bump into, sometimes the right book, and, maybe heard the right podcast, right? And I think that's kind of one of those things that at some point there was an idea. And maybe that episode that I heard from Investory kind of gave me the idea that then kind of got together with some little book that I read somewhere else. So listen, luck plays a role, and it plays a big role. If the dice don't fall, on your number every now and then, you're not going to succeed. However, at the same time that I believe that, I also believe that luck is really, really hard to influence. In fact, some people like me believe that you cannot influence it at all. So I can't do anything about luck, but I can do lots of things about skills and about experience and about being in the right place at the right time and about having the right attitude and having, the right activity to sort of improve my luck. Yeah. Someone very famous, very important said once that, success is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. And I think that's exactly the way I see the world. The preparation side of things and the work side of things and the drive and the skill side of things, which we all can improve on and we all can do better and we can all have an impact on, meeting just the rest of the randomness of the universe, which at some point will help us make progress.
Connect with you, potentially work with you. What's the best way they can reach out?
Yeah, listen, there's a couple of ways they can connect with us. So one of the things that we are kind of very, very putting a lot of resources and a lot of effort in is we put a lot of information about property investment, about mindset, and particularly about kind of high cash flow rooming houses out there in social media, both through the business Stone Horizon, as well as through my own personal channels. If you search in all the typical platforms, eventually you'll find us. But also, last year we published The Rooming House Millionaire, which became an Amazon bestseller in the last, in the first 2 days or so of publishing. And I think, it's a great opportunity to learn more about rooming houses. We share a very non-nonsense, very clear, very transparent way of investing in this type of property. So what I'll do is I'm going to create a special link that's going to allow your listeners to have an exclusive free copy of it. So that way, anyone who's a listener of Investory, whether it's now or in the future, will be able to kind of access a free copy. And then through there, we're able to also connect with us in the long term. And listen, and I hope that this conversation has inspired more than one person out there. Again, I'm very public and I'm very transparent about what I do. So if you've seen this or heard this, and you think you want to learn more or have another conversation about it, just reach out, whether it's through a direct message in any of the usual platforms, or whether it's through our phone or an email. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.